Welcome to Hope for the Soul podcast. We're glad you've joined us. We didn't realize we were already doing what podcasters do, but we are here today. Like us, follow us, subscribe us, share it with your brother-in-law on the Facebook. And I added that little twang to that just to keep the younger generation happy and on their toes. Good to have you today, Brother Wilson.
Good to be here, Smith and Smith.
Smith and Co. That's great. So we wanted to have you on today. Obviously, you are a leader's leader. If you're not familiar with Brother Wilson, he's passionate about leadership development. He's an author. He's an ordained minister. He's a licensed counselor, I believe.
No, I never made it that far.
Okay.
I checked out.
You checked out.
He fell short.
We got to it. Anyway, he is highly distinguished. He's passionate about the work of God, and he comes from a very unique perspective. And so we wanted you listeners today to hear his voice. So, Brother Wilson, just I guess to start this officially, why don't you give us a little of your background that I may have missed over,
Sure.
a broader picture, I guess.
Be delighted to. First of all, it's an honor to be a part of this, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 or 3 hours together. So it's probably not that long, but anyway, I grew up in a pastor's home in Indiana. Between my wife and I, we have 27 apostolic ministers in our family. I'm sure that's growing now, because I would include my sons. It's probably 28. So anyway, everything I was a part of was churches of 30 to 70, 80. That was my formative years. And so I decided, felt led of the Lord to go pastor, and my wife and I left. I had assisted my father several years after I'd got out, graduated from Bible college, and I soon pastored of a very small all missions church. And on a Sunday afternoon, I'm pushing a mower. I'm very upset, and I'm mad at everybody. I was mad at my wife. I'm mad at my assistant. I was like, I'm the only one. It's like Elijah. I'm the only one who cares. I'm the only one who has the vision. I'm the only one.
Nobody but me.
Nobody but me. It was one of those days, and I was just frustrated. So I'm pushing the mower. We live in East Tennessee. Across the street was a Cherokee National Forest, and I'll never forget it, man. There's one tree in the yard, in the front yard, and I'm pushing this mower to this tree, and I didn't realize I was praying. I didn't start off without, our Father which art in heaven. It wasn't that. Instead, I started off with that. I don't have to be here. I don't have to be here. I don't have to be putting up with this. This is ridiculous. And I could be full-time. At that time, I had my own construction business. And I said, while I'm frustrated, and I'm saying all these things in my head, not out loud, I'm pushing them over. And I said, all I want to do is train leaders. And the Lord spoke to me. He said, train them. And I didn't even realize I was praying. It was just talking, and he said, train them. And it wasn't one of those moments where I dropped to my knees in the middle of the yard and put my hands together and say, yea, Lord, thy servant heareth thee. I will do as you have said, Instead, I was so ticked. I just replied back, yeah, right. Like we got 4 or 5, to train, And the Lord spoke to me so clearly. And he said, if you'll be faithful with a little, I will give you much. And when he said that, I was right in front of the tree. That conversation took place in about 20, 25 feet. And when he said it, I just weeping. I mean, I was bawling. It was a life-changing moment for me. And so from that, it was a few years later that I resigned, and we felt led to, and didn't know where we were going. My wife had already declared we're going to Memphis, and she just felt it from the Lord. And sure enough, I was offered a position to be a family pastor. And so we moved to Memphis, and I'm in my mid-30s. And I always wanted to go back to school. I actually had gone back to school. I studied electrical engineering for a little while, and IUPUI, but I wanted to go back and complete a master's degree. So because of what I was doing, I dove in and started studying the counseling-related degree, and everything that a licensed professional counselor would have, from premarital counseling, marital counseling. I took all of that. It was my electives, because I thought I was going to change over and pursue a licensed professional counselor degree. And it came down to that last year that they would need those 18 credits, and it was studying psychoanalysis and schizophrenics. And I'm like, I'm done. And so I graduated with a human relations degree. But while I was there in Memphis, we stepped into a position of family pastor and launched this new ministry, and we had 150 young marrieds. And then the youth was in the transition. And so I stepped in and fulfilled the role of a youth pastor, and they had 150 young people. So I went from a church of 30 or so people, 30 to 40 on our average, and at the time we left, it was even less than that, up and down, moments. But I stepped away from that into something I had never stepped into in my life of, pastoring 300 people and all the systems and processes and things in place that I had never been exposed to in my life. And so this huge desire for leadership, I was now immersed in a church and an environment with a pastor who was very much that leader. And then 2 years later, this is not brief, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
But 2 years later, I'm like, I'm frustrated because now I'm feeling as though, I'm living and operating on about 20% of who I am. And when it came to ministry, I kind of had worked myself into this thought, I'm just a director of a program. We put on events and all.
You're an executive.
And we had marriage classes and all that every week. I'm speaking every week, but for the most part, my approach to ministry was that of like a director, not a pastor. And two things happened. One, God told me, because of times, it was so clear. How God set it up over the course of 5 months, set it up to that moment. He said, I have called you to pastor, and Memphis is your city. And that was a life-changing moment. The second one was that I went to visit an elder, and I'm frustrated during this time period. And she says, before you leave, let's pray. Grabs my hand, starts praying, and I couldn't believe that she did this, but she dropped down to the ground and laid her hands on my feet and started praying in the Holy Ghost. The next thing I knew, she was up, standing up, and she was real short, and she lifted her head up in the air, and she yelled out, "Thus saith the Lord." Said, "Wait on me, saith the Lord." And I'm just sitting there just bawling because I'm feeling frustrated. I leave from there, and I drive 45 minutes to visit another elder. She's 90 years old. I call repeatedly. She doesn't answer. She has horrible hearing issues. I get to the house, knock on the door multiple times. She lived with her daughter and son-in-law, and no one came to the door. And the third time, I said, well, she's not here. And I turn around and walk away. All of a sudden, the door opened, and she goes, if it ain't Brother Wilson. She goes, I was just reading the Bible. Wait on me, saith the Lord.
Oh, wow.
And just a couple of weeks later, I'm at Tennessee camp meeting, checking in the hotel, and Sam Emery is the speaker. He turns around and he says, I'm Sam Emery. He said, what's your name? I said, Eugene Wilson. He said, Brother Wilson, you pastor? I said, well, I'm a family pastor. I told him where I was at. And he laughed. He said, man, he said, I love your pastor. And he said, listen to me. He got real serious for a second. He said, when God goes to move you, he said, you make sure that you're just dragging your feet and you're hollering, no, leave me here. And then he laughed, and then he got real serious again. And he said, I didn't start pastoring until I think it was either 48 or 52 years old before I started pastoring. He said, you just wait on the Lord. You hear me?
Wow.
And so during my season of waiting, that was 7 years from that point on. I was there for 9 years. During my season of waiting, I went back to school, completed my master's degree and my doctorate. And 2019, I'm in Manila, Philippines, and doing some training with leaders. And Terry Schott gets up and speaks, and he says, I don't do Holy Ghost crusades. That's not what God's called me to do. He said, I teach leaders. And he said, I just so happen to be speaking to 252 leaders of the largest oneness apostolic movement in the world. It's here in the Philippines, larger than what is in the United States and the UPCI. And I'm the next speaker. And the Lord just reminded me. He said, I told you years ago, that if you'll be faithful with a little, I'll give you much. So anyway, that's a little bit of the journey. It's 20 years of that journey. I can go back 20 years that I was pushing that lawnmower. And since that time, not a brag, but just a God thing, in completion of my doctorate, I wrote Realign. That became the #1 sold book at General Conference that year.
Wow.
It's been translated to Spanish and French. It's now being translated to Mandarin. I wrote 70. It was the #1 sold book that year at General Conference. It's been translated to Spanish, French, and already has been translated professionally into Mandarin, and which is just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah.
And then the list just goes on and on, all the things that God has done. But it's been the unconventional path. It's not what you would ever do neck up. I told someone just before we started the podcast, I said I would tell everybody, do not do what I did, other than the fact that it's been a God thing.
So there's two things that you in this dialogue that you've mentioned that stick out, and I think maybe we can pivot and just follow the cloud and see where we end up. But you mentioned frustration and then waiting. And can you speak a little bit about how it's important to, when God says wait, that doesn't mean be idle. Sometimes it means
so
better
true.
yourself.
Yes.
So talk about maybe how you allowed that frustration in your season of waiting to fuel you to become better, so you're ready for when the door opens.
I'm so glad you picked up on that, because I think so many people miss that, and I talk about that. I probably don't talk about it enough, but I'm glad you said that. I absolutely believe that. Waiting is not, like as you said, it's not just remaining idle. At times you get frustrated with things. I've been there multiple times in life. Excuse me. Been there multiple times in my life where I've been frustrated. But I've always, God has helped me. I'm not always the quickest learner in this, but God has helped me to step back in those moments of frustration and not have and I love this term, it's not mine, but I picked it up somewhere, read it, but not to have a fixed mindset, but rather to have a growth mindset.
Wow, that's good.
You know, a fixed mindset is that.
Hang on, I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, write that one down.
You just keep on talking.
So there's been some research on this.
There's a tweetable moment.
A fixed mindset is that I can't change anything around me. It's just, it is what it is. This is the hand that it's been given to me. And, I can't really do anything else. A growth mindset looks at a situation and says, this is what it is, the same as a fixed mindset. But you know what? I can do something. I can do something to move forward. And part of that learning process, and I think it was Johnny Godare said, I've quit saying I have learned, and I now say I am learning. He said, because when I think I've learned something, God sends me back through something again, I learn some more. And so that learning journey, part of that was during a transition. This is 9 years in Memphis. We resigned, and our house is going to sell. We traveled to China, my wife and I, and the realtor is like, we need to have the power of attorney. Your house is going to sell while you're gone. Everything's coming together. And lo and behold, our house sat there on the market for 2 years. Wow. Every house in my neighborhood sold but ours. My wife was a school teacher. She had quit. She went back to be a teacher's assistant. During that period of time, I started traveling. And I'm not an evangelist. That's not my calling. But I would go out and I would do some leadership. And I'm just fresh out of the gate, completing my doctorate. I just completed it. And so I'm 45 years old. And I'm working construction, helping pastors with their churches in construction or remodel their home. And I would go and stay for a couple of weeks and then preach on the Sundays. And that was basically it for about a year and a half. And during that time, of frustration, I'm making a trip from Dallas back to Memphis, and I was so unbelievably frustrated. And I called a friend of mine up, and I'm just pouring it out. I mean, for hours. I got a 10, 11-hour drive, and it was hours of me fussing. And he says, when you get in, he said, why don't you go walking with me? And I said, well, I'm not getting in real late. He said, well, just call me. He said, I'll go walking with you. So at 11 o'clock at night, we are out walking a mile and a half, 2 miles. And he said, Eugene, he said, I was praying for you today. And he tells me years later, he said, I've never, ever heard you be as negative as you were that day. He said, you're not that kind of person. And I just felt like there was nothing I could do. All the promises that people had said, we got money for you. We're going to help you do this. We're going to help you do that. We're going to launch a leadership deal. We're going to help you start a church. Nobody came through for anything. And I'm like, man, what am I going to do? I've already I'm trying to sell my house. I've already quit everything. I'm not moving forward. I'm in a straitjacket. And it was just crazy. And he said, I was praying for you. And said, God, I want you to help Eugene, blah, blah, blah. And he said, the Lord spoke to me and said, I'm not going to do anything that you requested. He said, I've already told Eugene what to do.
Wow. Out by the tree.
And I'm like, so he tells me that, and now this is God's honest truth. He tells me that, and it made me mad. And I'm like, he says, so what is it? I said, I have no idea.
Eugene and Jonah.
Oh, well, I'm like, I don't even know what God said. I'm just like mad. So I go home, and I'm ticked. I'm like, God, I don't even know what to pray anymore. I can't move forward. I can't move back. I don't know what to do. I'm just stuck. I'd get up the next morning. I said, God, what is it? You supposedly have told me to do something. I don't know what it is, because I'm thinking it's time to move forward. It's time to go pastor. It's time to go, do something. And the Lord speaks to me that morning, just gentle, very, very gentle. It reminds me of the book that I said I wanted to write. That's it. Wow. Write the book. And I grabbed my laptop and started writing 70. 30 minutes later, my phone rings. It was a realtor. 2.5 weeks later, I was living in Dallas.
Oh, my goodness.
70, start writing it. And so it doesn't make sense sometimes in your frustration, because sometimes you're looking at frustration. Mine was about moving forward, and to move forward, it was like, okay, the house has got to sell. The money's got to come through to launch the church, or the money's got to come through to launch the ministry. Instead, the word from the Lord was write the book. And it was something that was tangible. It was something that was small, something that I could do. And so that was the lesson that the Lord had taught me over and over again before I finally got it, that in my moments of frustration, there's always something I can do, but it doesn't always connect with where I really want to go. But if I'll be faithful with that small thing, is the widow woman, hey, bake me a cake. It doesn't make sense, but God has a plan. It's so much bigger, so much greater, and it really is our faithfulness with the small things.
Our demographic that's going to listen or watch this, if they're watching, it's probably on Facebook. They're going to be a little older. If they're listening, they're probably on a podcast somewhere, and they're going to be mid-30s or below, maybe 40. They may be ministry. They may be business. They may just be a young adult looking for who they are. What do you tell those people right now that are looking for themselves? They're trusting God. They love Him. They're trying to figure out what's the next step, but yet they're dealing with their own level of frustration. What's the plan? Is there 3 steps that makes the magic happen?
Probably not.
Number one, you have to pursue God. This pop psychology has made its way too much into the church, and the answer is not just looking within self. We have to look to God, and I'm a firm believer in that. So you've got to connect with God. You got to hear His voice, and once you get a word from God, you have to stand on it. And sometimes that word is not. It's not like so clear that with explicit details of all the steps. Sometimes the word from the Lord is just the fact that God gives us the desires of our hearts. And those desires are pure. They're not egotistical. I'm not trying to get a position. I'm not trying to get prestige. I'm not trying to become famous. I just have a desire to help. I have a desire to serve. I have a desire to pour out. God gives us desires, and we align ourselves with the desires. And that many times that's just the word of the Lord. It's just aligning ourselves with those desires. Being faithful in growing and developing. I mean, I cannot stress that enough. We want to do, and as you just alluded to, but becoming always precedes doing. I had someone say many years ago in my doctoral pursuit, one of my professors made a statement, and it went along these lines. He said, when it's all said and done, the most what you become will be far greater than all you've ever done. And ultimately, that really is what it's about. Many are going to say, "Do we not prophesy in your name? We did all these things, but apart from me, I never knew you." So becoming is so much more important than doing. And if we will pursue those things, really pursue hearing from God, following those desires of our heart, being faithful with that, focusing on becoming. And now let's talk about, just for a moment, the real practical aspects of all that. Say we got all that down, and what I do practically, you got to be a good steward of your time. I mean, these things don't come easy. You got to have tenacity. I mean, it takes years. And we look at David on the throne. Well, we don't think about David, all those years spent running from Saul, living in a cave. We think about Joseph, second most powerful man in the world. We don't think about all the experiences he went through. And so when we're young, we tend to think, well, I remember thinking when I got to Bible college, if I went back to law school, which is something I wanted to do, I would be 27 years old. That would be really old. Well, now that I'm 55, 27 doesn't seem that old, I wish I had gone back to law school at the time, or went to law school. And so just being faithful with it, the tenacity, getting up and go. Man, I see so many young people and so many people, the time they spend on video games and social media and just waste time, but you have all these desires to want to do something. And then I have to say, because I've experienced this and I believe this full-heartedly, I have to say that God is more interested, and this is going back to becoming, God is more interested in who you become. So God is going to allow you to go through things. And too many people get sidetracked when trouble comes. Trouble should never sidetrack us. And you're going to have it. I remember looking at a 16-year-old. She told me all of her dreams. And I said, I believe in everything you said. I said, God's going to use you mightily. I said, but you're going to go through things that you don't even realize. And I said, and what you're talking about happening won't happen until you're in your 30s. And she went through a divorce. She tried to commit suicide at one point.
Wow. And
today she is living out her dream. God brought it around. Just as I said, I didn't see all that happening. I just knew that she was going to go through things because I look at the Bible. I see so many people. Yes,
formation,
absolutely.
journey.
Yeah, right here. Absolutely. Your book.
Yeah.
I'm pointing at it just in case you don't see it. I'm pointing at it.
We have a copy for you today if you haven't already.
No, I haven't given it to him yet. So.
I need your signature inside.
You know what? I knew you were coming, just so
look at him.
So you'll know I already claimed you to be a friend.
Come on now,
put my name on
Absolutely.
it. If I need to scratch the friend part off, we can do that.
No, you need to add the word great. Great friend. Thank you. Yeah, talking about the journey of a spiritual formation, being formed. Yeah, this is it. This is it, and that doesn't mean we don't do the practical things. I mean, some of the crazy practical things that I did. I remember taking my Myers-Briggs, personality test. And I remember looking at it in my percentages, and I looked at it, and it said that only like 3% of the population has your blend. And because I think it was all based on the percentages. And they said, you're a good candidate to pursue being a professor. And I've taught at Urshan and UGST and now President Texas Bible College. And you make a good counselor. Well, I've done all of that. And all that came on my Myers-Briggs, which is crazy, And then I know my personality with the DISC profile. I'm an I, and that is my true personality. I'm an inspiring influencer. I'm a people person, big picture. I don't like details. And it's so funny that I've been executive pastor. I've served in administrative capacities, and it's all learned. It's not natural. And I'm not really that good. Good people are really, really good. I just, tread water. But those kind of things, the DISC personality, and studying those things and looking at, well, how's God made me? What do I really like? And I think about the Apostle Paul, who is highly skilled. I mean, he's got equivalent today. We'd say he's a PhD.
Yeah.
And he writes the majority of the New Testament. It's not a surprise. On top of that, he displays the traits of a dominant driver. This one thing I do, I'm going to go forward. He's opposed to the Apostle Peter. I mean, he doesn't have a problem with
confrontation, conflict.
He's a dominant driver. So it's not a surprise that Paul does the things he does. But then you have the Apostle Peter, who displays all the traits of an inspiring influencer. He's big picture. He's 100 miles an hour. He's got energy. He's animated. He's we're going to do this. We're going to do that. Doesn't always have a good plan. Doesn't always follow through. He's an inspiring influencer. It's not a surprise that he's the one preaching on the day of Pentecost. He inspires people. And so God uses those kind of things. So I think looking at those tools are good, but you make sure that you have the foundations with becoming and pursuing God. And then put those other tools in there, and man, the picture starts to become very clear, like a funnel. You real wide at the top, narrow down.
Yeah, I think it's admirable the fact that you're well versed in ministry and in learning, formal education, and then just life application and just the experiences of life that you've been through. But how do you stay focused when you have all that you have going on? How do you stay focused whenever it comes time to write a book like Difference Makers? Obviously, there was a lot of things going on in your life. You're not just an author. But I guess so talk us through your process of writing a book and then the birthing point of Difference Makers.
Sure.
So two-part.
Thank you. The first thing I would say is that you gotta have an extremely deep passion, and it can't be just a desire. It's got to be something you're really extremely passionate about, and I'm passionate about writing. It's not just something that I want to write a book. I'm passionate about it. The subject matter matters. I'm passionate about the subject. That's very, very important. Very practical. I have a lot of things going on, and to be honest, right now, I'm struggling to write. I'm struggling because I'm doing multiple things, and I'm developing my new rhythm, but it's coming. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I dove in, and so I'm writing right now. And I'll have a book done by the end of the year. But I made a vow, excuse me, I made a vow many years ago that I would write one book every year of my life, and some years write two, and I'm not going to let that go. It's a major, major drive. So I get up early in the morning, and I write late at night. And if I try to do anything else, I'm really messed up. Now, here's my personal struggle. It's the same thing with my devotions, time with the Lord, the most important things. As Stephen Covey said, you got to put the big rocks in the jar first. And sometimes I get sidetracked with some other things that are urgent things. As he talks about these 4 quadrants of time management, you don't know that, look it up. It's incredible. And quadrant number 1 is the important things that are urgent. Well, I have more important, urgent things than ever. And I don't want to be that kind of person who just does that, because you really need to be focused on quadrant number 2, which is things that are very important, but they're not urgent. And he says that highly effective leaders spend 85% of their time in quadrant number 2, which is all about focus. Wow. And the challenge there is when you take on new responsibilities, you're working with people, you're working with situations, and because of all that, there are many things that are important and urgent because the systems, the processes are not in place. And so I got to get all those things in place so I can really, truly focus. And so now you're trying to focus to move things forward around you while you're also taking care of urgent things. And it adds some due stress, but you got to stay with it, get those systems and processes in place. So practical things, I live by my calendar for the most part. When I say I live by my calendar, it's all there. I mean, there's appointments, and I've got blocks that I set in my calendar. And my personal goal is to aim for about 70%, because I'm not a black and white, by the box kind of person. I'm not that way at all. So I feel if I can do at least 70% of what I'm aiming for, then that gives me the flexibility that I can, I want to go do this right now. I'm going to run to Starbucks and have a conversation with someone and blow off one of my appointments I made myself, but I know that I'm going to have to make it up later.
So
that's that part of it, yeah.
This is, I guess, I didn't let you finish your answer,
No.
but this is kind of a struggle and a leadership part where me and Kayla are right now, is entering into a new role, is letting go of stuff that we don't have to do that other people can do. Like, that's really hard for me. And I know, like, the church won't grow past that.
Right.
Like, I've got to release things. So talk a little bit about that. Maybe not to the people, maybe just to Trent and Kayla.
Yeah. But you have
free
to be
counseling here.
Here we go. This is why we got you.
It's funny. So here would be the first thing on that, is that you got to be willing to allow people to do things that will not be as good as what you would do them.
Yeah, that's part of the.
So that's the first thing, and you got to understand that given time, those people will do it better than you do them, and and then along with that, you also have to know really truly what is your calling, and what is your skill set, and where are you headed. And when you do that, I think it was Andy Stanley told a friend of mine. He ran into him. He was at a conference, and he got behind the stage and ran into Andy Stanley. And they had this quick conversation, and Andy Stanley said, I just do 2 or 3 things well. And he said, other than that, I don't do a whole lot. And so I remember when I first started saying, well, I don't know. I was in Memphis on staff, and people would come to me and ask me different questions, things about the church. What about this? What about that? And just practical things. Hey, where does this get stored at? Hey, where does this go? Who do we see on this? And I just started saying I don't know, because I didn't know the answer. And it became so liberating to me, because for the first time in my life, I had realized that I don't have to know everything. And so now it's like one of my favorite things to say, well, I don't know. And I will turn that to someone else. I'll give it away. And so when you get to that point and you realize, man, this is what my skill sets really are. This is what I really do enjoy doing, and then just give it away. And then on top of all that, and I would say this to you personally, God's called you to pastor. And so your primary purpose, according to Ephesians 4, is that you are to be an equipper. So how can you equip people? How do you equip people? And so one of the ways is teaching and preaching, instruction. But they only remember 30% of what they hear. They'll remember 90% of what they do. So you're not equipping them until you release them to allow them to start doing something.
Goodness gracious.
And so you've got to let go. Otherwise, you're not fulfilling your job.
Yeah. That's powerful. Keep talking. I'm listening, man.
That's one of the things, Brother Wilson, that we do as transition pastors. That is years ago, many years ago. Trent's 35 now, but when he was 25, he handled our church budget.
Awesome.
When he was 25, he started handling. They started handling calendar and began handling people, and understanding that the best way for them to become equipped and grow was to let them feel the weight of it.
Yes.
And then there's more than one time they place someone in position without seeking counsel, maybe looking at the big picture.
Yeah.
And they come to me and said, one time that Trent says, "Dad, you're going to have to help me get out of this." And I looked at him and said, "Bub, I didn't help you get into that."
That's excellent.
And so you have to find a way to undo this and navigate.
I love it.
And so what he's telling you, and the same thing I've said and others have said, you empower people by letting them feel the weight.
Yep.
And then they feel the success, then they also have to feel the weight of the failures.
Yes.
And then you celebrate their wins, and then you help own their losses.
Yeah. And if I could say, there are two things I think are important, and I learned this from my mentor when I was in Memphis. After I was there for a few months, he said, "Okay, now we talked about this." He said, "Get settled in, get this started with the classes," and he said, "We'll talk." Excuse me. We'll talk in a couple months. So we sit down. He goes, "What is your vision for family ministries?" And I said, "Oh." I said, "You tell me your vision. You're the pastor. You tell me your vision, and I'll make it happen." He goes, "No, I really want to know, what is your vision?" And we went back and forth, and finally he just smiled. He said, "Okay." He says, "I can see we're not getting anywhere," because I was not going to tell him my vision, because I'm like, "You're the senior pastor." And he said, "Okay, this is my vision. We're going to start family ministries, and my vision is to bring Eugene and Carrie here to be the family pastors." He says, "So now what is your vision?" And that's when I learned what shared vision really was about.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Shared vision wasn't me getting up and just sharing the vision. Sharing vision was truly sharing and allowing others to be a part of it. And it's so important. That's where you get your buy-in. And so that's one of the things I would say that you consider. Another thing is, and your church, I don't know the history of your church. I don't know how large it was when your dad became pastor. I don't know how large it was when you stepped in. But I can just tell you that God's plan and purpose for your church is for it to continue to grow and increase, which means, and I'm just talking to you straight from leadership, which means that the skill sets that your dad had to have to lead the church to where it's at today through those years is not the skill sets that you need to lead it forward. Your skill sets are going to be different, which means that you're going to do some things differently. And so, you need to figure out what those skill sets are and getting to grow and develop. And I would say, based on history of just working with churches and leaders, that you're probably going to work with teams more so than your dad ever worked with teams. And so you got to figure out how did I lead teams? How do I do this? And so, based on what you were just sharing, Bishop, your son, and talking, I'm sure that you see all those things. And I talk to pastors who are in your age, and they'll say these things. They say, "Man, I see this. I know where it needs to go," because they feel like this. But there needs to be more and more teams, and we need to work with people. And so you are in a cool place, man. You're a really cool place to be at.
We're definitely having fun, and we're learning. Dad's definitely, and Mom too, they've empowered us, like you said. And now looking back, I recognize that wasn't easy for him to let go of a lot of things that he let go of. And now I'm struggling. Okay, it was done to me. Now I've got to, I've got to reciprocate that. So difference makers, Dad. I think you and Mom just did this.
We read the book. I've read the book, and then we are taking a small group through it now. Basically, a small group read a couple of chapters, and we meet next month. We'll have a couple people bring their takeaways back on the chapter. It's proving to be extremely interesting. So if you don't mind,
Thank you.
I think this is gonna be a big book for you.
Thank you.
It looks like. And so, where did this thing start?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm nearing the end of my 30s, and I thought, man, my life in the last 10 years has changed so much. I started pastoring a month before turning 30 years old, and I just looked at my life and thought, man, it's changed. And my dad had always made a special emphasis on principles. You know, principles are both timeless, they're universal, they work everywhere, all cultures. And so I'm just fascinated with principles because I understand that our culture in North America is totally different than the church culture of China. But a principle that would work in China would also work in North America. What would work in North America would also work in China. So many of the things that we place emphasis on will not work in China. You can't take promotions. You can't take the cool lights. You can't take the buildings. You can't take the steeples. You can't take the signage. You can't do all these things. Doesn't mean that they're wrong, but that's just not a principle. So there are things that are principles that would also work there. So these are the kind of thoughts patterns I'd had for years growing up. You know, what are those principles? So I was so hungry for them. And so I'm in towards the end of my 30s. I'm looking back over basically the last 10 years, and I just started making a note of all the principles that I felt like I had learned in those 10 years. And I wrote down 10 principles. And a few years ago, I thought, man, I need to go back to those principles because I taught pieces of them, preached messages about them. And they were birthed out of my journey while pastoring, things that the Lord was teaching me. And so I went back and looked at those 10, and I began to think, man, I need to put those into a book. And I began thinking about that 30-year-old who was stepping into new areas of life and ministry. And so my target became that 25 to 35-year-old that I wanted to write to. And began to take those 10 principles, begin to look at them, tweak them, work with them. And I thought, man, that principle is actually the same one as this one. It's just said differently. And when it was all said and done, I ended up with 7. I wasn't trying to have 7. That's just what I ended up with.
Worked out, yeah.
Yeah. And so I said, you know what? I want to write a short book. I want to write something that's 2,600 words. Not 100 words, but 26,000 words. And I typically write around 40, 42, 44,000 words. So I just started writing, and man, it flowed. Oh, my word, did it ever flow. I had that book done quicker than any book I've ever written. Of course, it was a shorter book, but still, it wasn't research-based. I didn't have any footnotes, endnotes, which I have in Realign and 70, or have a lot of that, Leading Growth. But man, it flowed. It was just from my heart. So then this is the crazy thing, I sent it off to some friends of mine who are my age and older. Excuse me. I've got a very good friend in his mid-60s. He's one of my closest friends. So I sent it off to them. They all read it. And every single one of them said, Eugene, this is the best book you've ever written. And anyway, I don't know. Man, it's just crazy. Then I sent it in to the publisher. They're like, man, can you write a small group, some questions for it? And I'm like, man, I don't own any workbook. I'm not into that, not interested in it. And so I started gathering resources, trying to get ideas, and none of it worked. And finally, a couple, 3 or 4 months later, I was like, I got to get this thing done. And I sat down and I thought, if I was going to have a workbook, what would I want it to look like? What would I want it how I would want it to flow and all. And then when I did that, the workbook came together so fast. I had it done in just a few days, and I was like, this is nuts, and I fell in love with it. And so I hope it's a blessing to people. Some people say, what is your favorite book? I was like, man, ask me what my favorite chocolate is,
They're all different.
I love them.
We, in Dad's small group, where he leads Difference Maker, there's people that are medically disabled, can't work. There's an attorney, a doctor. There's highly professional CPAs. It's just the whole grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And that's I think why that book is so effective is because it doesn't matter your station in life. It empowers you to take the next step and grow and do more.
Thank you. I never intended it to be that way, but one of my friends replied back, they're my age, and they're like, this is the best book you've ever written. They were like moved by it. They said, man, I can't put it down. And I'm like, man, I didn't even write it for you guys, And so, but I go back to it myself, and I don't really go back and read a lot of my books. I use the material, but I've gone back to, and I wept at times of writing some of those stories because they're so, the Trudy story.
Yeah.
Oh, my word, it's so moving. I drove by her church the other day in Tennessee. Wow. I drove by it with Ron Woodford, just driving down the road, and I just looked over and I thought about her. I never said a word. This is the first
Shout
time I've
out
said
Ron
anything about
Wolford.
it.
Shout
But I
out.
thought, yeah, shout out to Ron Whipper.
Thank you so much for taking this time today.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Smith and Smith.
And,
Yes.
and
We definitely have to do this again. My
Oh, I
goodness.
would love it.
We got several stacked up podcasts scheduled today, so we can't take more time. But we need to sit down and do a long form.
Oh, I
and
would
just
love
talk.
it.
we need to
Just an
have
hour.
you come to Conroe for something.
Yeah,
We'll
sit
do it.
up and do it.
We'll do it.
Thank you
been a
once
blessing.
again. Yeah, thanks everybody for listening and watching today. If you haven't purchased Difference Maker yet by Dr. Eugene Wilson, get
And
that.
formed.
It's informed by my dad, Pastor R. Kent Smith. Please get those. They're on Amazon. Anywhere where books are sold, you can find both of these books. Take care, guys. We'll see you next week right here on Hope for the Soul. Bye-bye.